Major funding for Telehell is provided by Dave's Archives. At Dave's Archives, he personally transfers, archives, and preserves classic commercials from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s and shares them with you. Don't forget about his Friday night live stream on, well, guess when? Go to davesarchives.com. By RetroCirc on YouTube. Step inside the RetroCirc video store, where commercials come back to life. RetroCirc. Nostalgia now. And as always, it's spelled with a Q at the end. By Kier's Nostalgia Corner, a collection of commercial compilations, retro nostalgic things, and other random things that come to mind. Look for her on YouTube at KIERS Nostalgia Corner, and don't forget to check out her live streams early in the week. By Kev the Ripper on YouTube, home to some of the most obscure TV shows you may or may not have heard of, all with original commercials and all not seen since their original air dates. It's Kev the Ripper at KEVRIPZ. And by the very generous benefactors who grace us on our Patreon at patreon.com/telehellpodcast, including Rhonda Farrell, Rick Kalacki Jr., Chris Michaud, Meredith Morrissey, Rabbite, Matt Seelig, Spare Parts, and Neil Weinstein. Thank you. What does it take for someone to be branded as a Renaissance man? The simple dictionary definition is that they're a person of many talents or areas of knowledge, a jack of all trades, if you will. If you hail from the world of showbiz, however, what constitutes what a Renaissance man can be all depends on what that person does to parlay their existing successes into broader ones in other fields. While there are hundreds of examples to choose from, let's save a little time by mentioning one of the most obvious ones.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
I don't have to tell you how Walt Disney was able to parlay an early career as a cartoonist and morph it into the media monolith that it is today. But it certainly wouldn't be that way were it not for proving to himself and to the world that he was an expert artist, animator, voice actor, writer, director, producer, businessman, theme park developer, and overall raconteur first, so that when he eventually passed away in 1966, no matter who was running the company that he built, it would remain in good, albeit sometimes shaky, but otherwise highly profitable hands. Now, in terms of today's subject, we admit that Disney is a pretty high benchmark to compare anybody else to, but we use him as our example to make one point abundantly clear. That just because there are those out there who have the ability to do just about everything in their own walks of life, doesn't necessarily mean that one should do just about everything and expect similar results of success each time. As tempting as it is to go all over the map, sometimes it's best for one to stay in their respective lane on the road to success. Failure to do so may cause a multi-car and career pileup that may take a little while to recover from.
I just wanted to ask Walt a question. Walt, did you check with the government and see if they needed any money lately? You know what money he put into this place.
And now.
How do you know it's after they got the masks on?
I didn't know.
Whoa, but now you're gonna have
It's the Bonfire of Vanity Projects in Telehell.
Now, how's this for a Renaissance man?
Yeah, well, look, I have an appointment someplace. Why don't I go? Will you stay? Or let me leave?
Now.
And I don't need it. I don't mind you touching. I don't mind you smoking. But don't lick it.
Just calm down.
Born Joseph Levitch in 1926, Jerry Lewis's path to stardom is no different than most famous names. Early struggles growing up, tumultuous family life, but also finding an escape through the world of comedy. Ultimately escaping to comedy clubs in New York during the winter and the Catskill Mountains in the summer. Shortly after World War II, en route to becoming a durable solo act, Lewis would meet a man who would change his life forever.
Let me know when you're gonna hit me.
Now.
You
you would say, Gwendolyn, I've been looking for you for a long time. Then you take a deep breath and say, where have you been? Take a deep breath, wait a minute. Right.
While working as two separate solo acts in Atlantic City, Lewis met up-and-coming lounge singer Dean Martin. And it was thanks to their natural chemistry and a lot of ad-libs, Martin and Lewis set a new standard for duo acts for the next decade.
5 minutes. We're all through now.
So we'll do like the other show where we ad-lib, but no dirty joke.
No.
From the stage came the screens, both big and small. The rising medium of television was where the duo really exploded thanks to being one in a rotation of hosts on the much-beloved Colgate Comedy Hour on NBC. Then, in 1956, for reasons that even the most expert of biographers could never truly figure out, they split up and went their separate ways. And while Dino continued with music, movies, and his weekly celebrity roasts, the true range of Jerry's talents we put out on full display. Movies for certain, and let's not forget about his lifelong philanthropy for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, but also on television. First from 1957 to 1962 with a series of one-off specials for NBC, and then in 1963, the then-young ABC network pulled out all the stops to give him his own weekly variety show. And thus, The Jerry Lewis Show was born.
There is no mystery connected with the show, the cancellation, and so on. This is, of course, something I think people are entitled to know. It's just literally what you read in the papers. I mean, there's no mystery about it. What you read in the papers is the truth. It boils down to a simple disagreement. I wanted the show on, they wanted it off.
Which, through no fault of its own, was canceled after 13 weeks. But don't feel too bad for that show, because the week after it was canceled, the producers were able to let a phoenix rise from the ashes to become the more durable Hollywood Palace for the next 5 years. But Jerry was not to be deterred. After a few more years of movies and philanthropy, Lewis decided to give television another try in 1967, this time back on NBC, though strangely enough, this too was a comedy variety series that was also called The Jerry Lewis Show. While this version was a little more successful than the ABC version, it still only lasted 2 years. Then, for the rest of the 60s, the entirety of the 70s, and the beginning of the 80s, Lewis transformed his overall showbiz facade. Sure, he still did his fair share of comedic roles on TV and in the movies, but as he was getting older, he was less of a comic figure and more of an auteur, putting his talents behind the scenes as a producer and, more notoriously, as a director, the most infamous of which was 1972's The Day the Clown Cried, where Lewis would play a clown during the height of World War II and the peak of the Holocaust. A film that had such a fabled history of issues behind the scenes that, to this day, the film remains unfinished and unreleased. This prompted Lewis to take a break from making movies, and instead focusing more on his efforts with MDA, which, depending on who you ask, and I do not say this part lightly, were years that were either seen as a beacon of hope for those afflicted with the disease.
When you stop by your neighborhood 7-Eleven store and make a donation to fight muscular dystrophy, you're helping Brian and thousands of kids like him. My kids.
Or if you're an unfortunate pessimist with no soul whatsoever, was seen as nothing short of exploitation to the nth degree.
How was it working with Jerry Lewis?
Jerry Lewis can kiss my crippled ass, Howard. Fuck him. That asshole. He's been doing this goddamn telethon now for like 30 fucking years. I haven't seen dime one. Nothing.
This scrutiny, as well as his rumored private family life, has led to what many people have speculated is the real Jerry Lewis. A man who's a genius on camera and especially to the people of France, but a genuine pain in the ass when it comes to being pressed about anything that's not connected to comedy.
I defy them to battle me one-on-one, and because they're in a wheelchair doesn't change anything. Right. I'll turn from the love and affection and my need to help a crippled child right to a hostile attack on someone else disabled because they're using that rather than recognizing they're in trouble and someone cares.
Yeah. But see, even the attitude that you express now, Jerry...
What, do I sound hostile?
Yeah, it makes...
But before you go around thinking that Jerry Lewis was a temperamental dick who just so happened to be a comedy god and an otherwise great humanitarian, let me diffuse you of all of that by saying...
Duh! Of course he was! He earned every right to be, and I'm pretty sure he would have admitted that wholeheartedly.
You work in the business for over 70 years and not have an air of arrogance. I dare you. Or to crib some notes from one of my other favorite comedians.
I had this theory called douchebag credits. Every celebrity has earned a certain amount of douchebag credits. Tom Hanks has the most douchebag credits. If tomorrow's paper read, Tom Hanks punches nun, your first question is, what the hell did that nun do to Tom Hanks?
Which brings us to 1982. And Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy.
You don't just walk onto a network show without experience. Now, I know it's an old hackneyed expression, but it happens to be the truth. You got to start at the bottom.
I know, that's where I am, at the bottom.
That's a perfect place to start.
For those unfamiliar, Lewis plays a late-night talk show host with a bit of a mean streak. Although the movie was critically acclaimed, it was a rare box office flop for Scorsese that eventually found greater success as the years went on, and also inspired other works years down the line.
How about another joke, Murray?
No, I think we've had enough of your jokes.
What do you get?
I don't think so.
When you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash!
Call the police,
I'll
Gene.
tell you what you get!
Call the police.
You get what you fucking deserve!
But hidden among the murkiness of the movie was Lewis's performance as the fictional talk show host, Jerry Langford.
Yes, it is. I have a life, okay? Well, I have a life, too. That's not my responsibility.
Well, it is when you tell me to call you and then you don't...
I told you to call to get rid of you!
In spite of how much the movie underperformed, Lewis probably gave the best non-comedic performance of his career at the time. Truth be told, I think his 2006 appearance on SVU is his best dramatic role, but guess what? I digress. Because his performance in King of Comedy was well received, not to mention a hosting appearance on SNL in 1983, Hollywood executives started to kick around the notion of Jerry Lewis as an actual late-night personality. Of course, that was just a pipe dream, considering the fact that only one show owned late-night TV, lock, stock, and barrel, and wiped the floor with any competition that came his way. It cannot be understated just how much of a force The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was to be reckoned with for about 99% of its 30-year run. But at times, not only was it the biggest show on late night, in some cases, it was the biggest show on television, period. Especially during those years when NBC was languishing in third place. A show that was so storied and fabled that the other two networks put on reruns, old movies, and, if you're ABC, Nightline, instead of sacrificing a potential talent to slaughtering ratings that Carson would deliver every night. And this was before the Fox network or even cable picked things apart piece by piece. Not that the other networks didn't try to dethrone the king, but here now is only a partial list of people who tried to take down Carson, only to turn tail and leave. People like Joey Bishop, Dick Cavett, Merv Griffin, David Brenner, Pat Sajak, even Carson's Tonight Show predecessor Jack Parr, and perhaps most notoriously, Joan Rivers, all of whom shows were born, tried, and died. Which brings us to 1983 and a little side quest involving probably one of the most ambitious competitors to take on the king. Don't worry, I promise we'll get back to Jerry Lewis in a moment. If you're wondering why we're playing the Fred Silverman Patron Saint Choir here, first of all, it's been a little while since we have, and I didn't want it to get too dusty. But more importantly, it was his post-NBC production company, Intermedia Entertainment, that spearheaded the drive to make one of the most popular stars on Canadian television a household name in the States. Silverman, along with the TV division of MGM and syndicator Metro Media Producers Corporation, pooled all of their resources in the hopes to make this man, the future, of late night.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Thicke.
Thank you very much. Premiere week on Thick of the Night. Alan's guests will include the Thick of the Night players, Richard Belzer, Charles Fleischer, Gilbert Gottfried, and special guest stars Barry Manilow, Joan Collins, The Tubes, John Lennon's other lover May Pang, Eric Estrada, Ted Knight, John Ritter, and Tom Canning and the One Night Band.
Thick of the Night, starring Alan Thicke in his American TV debut, is a show that I wish we could review. Partly because this show has a mythical reputation for winding up on worst TV shows of all time lists for some reason. But mostly because there are not only no full episodes of the show to review, but there is also no first episode to review as well. Having only seen scattered clips on YouTube, however, I can tell you confidently that at least the show tried to be different in terms of shaking up the talk show format. Not just having guests come on and chat and hearing the latest music groups sing, but also incorporate a higher concentration of comedy pieces into the proceedings than most other talk shows, which stands to reason considering that each episode originally lasted 90 minutes. And because they were put on independent TV stations with a 10 or 9 p.m. newscast, the show started at 11 or 10 p.m. in most markets in an effort to lure away potential Carson viewers a half hour earlier. Unfortunately, all the excess comedy wasn't enough to get people's attention, so the show scaled back to a 60-minute program in the mid-season of 1984. But by that point, the writing was already on the wall, and Thick of the Night vanished into thin air by the spring of 1984. The cancellation left a couple problems in its wake, particularly for Metro Media and its chain of independent affiliates who suddenly had nothing to put on in late night. Or so they thought. Upon realizing that their great white northern hope was going down for the count, the production company tried to cobble together a backup plan at a moment's notice. And it's at this point where we need to throw up a couple citation neededs here and there, because unfortunately there isn't really that much information that we can tell you about how Metro Media arrived at the conclusion that Jerry Lewis would be the one to try and save everybody's ass. In fact, on the Wikipedia entry of all 3 programs combined, the talk show is only given a single paragraph blurb, and I'm trying to stretch that out more than a condom worn by a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. All I can tell you before going into this is that Metro Media agreed to give Lewis a 1-week test run on its affiliates to see if the notion of essentially bringing his king of comedy character to life on a nightly basis could possibly work. And we will see just how much art imitates life and vice versa
after the break.
I'm wearing French Star, the jeans for the 80s.
This week on Telehell's premium content of The Damned.
It's toll free.
The only way to listen to Telehell's premium content of The Damned is by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Telehell podcast. For just a few bucks a month, you can listen to our premium content and get some swag along the way. Once again, that's patreon.com/Telehell podcast. And now, back to this week's torture.
June 18th, 1984. A coal miners' riot in Yorkshire, England triggered the Battle of Orgreave. The Reflex by Duran Duran was at the top of the charts. And since this was a syndicated show, you'd have to check your local listings, as they say, to find it. But for argument's sake, let's just say at 11 p.m., 10 p.m. Central, we get a simple introduction from the show's designated announcer and sidekick, Charlie Callis. More on him in a moment. After an opening montage of various parades and gatherings getting flanked by the show's logo, Mr. Callis does his best Ed McMahon to introduce our host.
Hello. My name is Cary Grant. Yeah, that's me, Cary Grant. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you a friend of mine who is so funny. You know, there's an old saying that the world is a comedy to those who think and a tragedy to those who feel. And I say, oh yeah? But this man I'm about to introduce to you, when he sings, the whole world laughs. He's about that tall, he's got a little doggy, he makes people laugh, I love him dearly, and you're gonna get flipped. He does Gunga Din better than Gunga Din. Oh, you're gonna laugh when you see this man. Well, I hope you will, yes. Because,
will you get on with it?
Jerry Lewis!
And I never want to hear anybody complain that I'm too long-winded ever again. And by the way, yes, Callis repeats that opening shtick every night for the remaining 4 episodes. I guess because the announcer/sidekick role is pretty much limited to announcing and sidekicking on other shows, I can kind of see why he wanted to do that, but even Ed McMahon and Andy Richter knew that the show belonged to somebody else. And speaking of that somebody else, that brings us to the night's monologue. Now, as we said before in our review of The Chevy Chase Show, episode 35, it's not always fair to judge how funny a show can be right off the bat based on the first monologue of one's first episode. Except here, Lewis is a well-established comedic talent who has been more than capable of doing entire stand-up and vaudeville routines throughout his career. So a 5-minute set has to be a walk-off home run for him.
Did you ever live in this lifetime and say to yourself, we take things for granted, right? All of my life, I'm living 58 years. And all of my life, I'm looking around, I'm seeing things, they're interesting. I have a voracious curiosity. I see things that are marked like peanut brittle. Peanut brittle? I don't particularly care for it. I don't eat it. You look at it and you pass it. You see something else that says it's a Sony, it's a this or that. You recognize that. When you get something like peanut brittle, you open it.
I never knew that was in there.
Over the years.
Okay, that's a little bit of an antique to start things off, but you gotta realize that Jerry's comedy hails from as far back as the dying days of vaudeville, and he's trying to translate some of that for an audience of rapidly aging baby boomers. So, instead of a traditional monologue, he takes a page out of the book of Carol Burnett and implores the audience to ask him some questions.
I just wondered how you felt about being in The King of Comedy. I really enjoyed that, and just wanted to know...
I loved being in it. It was my financial pleasure as well as a creative pleasure because I was working with De Niro, one of the finest actors in the world.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I really wasn't through, but if you have something, you go right ahead. I had something else to say, Chuck. In other words, let me get through, then you can go. All right, I'm through. Go ahead. No, I had one thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, after hearing that, there's really only one thing we can do next. For the remainder of this episode, if we come across anything of note that happens to be questionable or groan-worthy or something that we just plain don't like, we will immediately break in with an apology to the people of France to be spoken in French. Not by me, but by a designated French-speaking lady. Or should that be lady? For now, though, let's go to the next audience question.
Yes, sir.
Jerry, for a man who had a heart attack a number of months ago, you look fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel marvelous. Everybody should have open heart surgery. Yeah, because you don't smoke, you don't eat junk food. I'll never go to Wendy's again. I think we'll be sued, but I never go there because I used to eat all kinds of junk food and I smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day for 43 years, and now I'm totally clean. I eat no bad food. I don't smoke at all. Instead of smoking, I chew gum and I have candy drops. I'm going to get lockjaw, and diabetes, but my heart is in great shape. We have a marvelous show for you. Thank you for coming. We'll be back in just a moment.
Well, kudos to Jerry for this show being a victory lap of sorts after having a publicized heart attack and open heart surgery in 1982. And yes, he managed to live another couple of decades afterwards. But for somebody who was still recovering from it at the time, doing a nightly talk show with the grind that it's been known to have has to be a pretty risky move after such a treatment. I mean, if he was really stressed out, it might have been enough for his heart to go
Ivan.
after the first break, as well as a shot of Jerry sticking an entire drinking glass into his mouth. Wait, what?
It's all done with a small mouth.
Okay, fire up the French music. Let's go.
Peuple de France, nous comprenons, nous savons que vous aimez Jerry Lewis et nous faisons de notre mieux pour être indulgents avec lui. Sachez simplement que nos critiques de son talk show viennent d'un endroit autrement bon. Merci.
So after that, what would a first episode of a talk show be without getting to know some of the side characters that inhabit the program, starting with the show's band leader, Lou Brown, who, as it turns out, had worked with Lewis on a wide variety of projects over the decades, including the first 2 TV shows that bore his name, a handful of his movies, and several decades worth of MDA telethons before his passing in 2007. As for the show's other main participant, we already met him at the top of the show. But let me tell you young folk out there a little bit about a man named Charlie Callis.
I love you. Hello. How are you? He repeats, he is the most fantastic mimic. Watch. Pull. Whoa.
Comics come and comics go. But Charlie Callis was in a class by himself. Not unlike Jerry, he too would garner his laughs by using a rubber face and guttural voices emanating from his mouth. And not unlike Jerry, he too circled the orbit of the Rat Pack without actually being a certified part of it. And furthermore, not unlike Jerry, this is something that practically defined most of his career right up until his passing in 2011. Unlike Jerry, however, he didn't take any sharp right turns into super serious filmmaking or philanthropy. He was a straight-up comic through and through, no matter how inscrutable the sounds that came out of his mouth were.
I've grown accustomed to her smile, accustomed to her truth, accustomed to her... Charlie Callis.
So now, as a formal introduction as Jerry's sidekick, the two of them do a short bit about a hypothetical interview between Callis's version of William F. Buckley and Jerry's version of Truman Capote. 2 more people that should give you out there a reason to call your grandparents and catch up with them.
Wow. You know, Truman, it always amused me that when we talked about Spinoza as opposed to Voltaire.
One eternity later.
When I was writing in Cobra.
Good. That's good.
The guys in the prison didn't like anything that I was writing. So when I went back to New York, I told them all the same thing.
Nous croyons fermement que Jerry Lewis ne peut pas faire d'erreur. Charlie Callis, d'un autre côté, essaie peut-être un peu trop.
After that bit of banter, we jump right into the first guest. And for a first show, you absolutely must have someone on who can blow the doors off the whole place before even a single word could be said. Lucky for us, Jerry has a pretty deep Rolodex.
Ladies and gentlemen, for me to make this announcement is very meaningful to me because when you introduce somebody that's very special in your life, you want to do it in such a manner that nobody can ever pick it apart. And there's no way I can really do that. There's no way I can really say what I'd like to say other than we're proud to present a legend, Mr. Frank Sinatra.
There you go, old Blue Eyes. He may have been in the twilight of his years by then, but he was still an A-lister by every sense of the word. And I'm sure that with the career that he's had, he could give us stories for days, and maybe even treat us to one of his many croonings.
Frank, I don't think that the public knows. It's almost trivia, but you've never done a talk show.
Nope. And if you take too long, I'll never do another one.
Okay, that's a bold-faced lie, because here he is doing one of several appearances on Johnny Carson's show over the decades.
I grew up with you, listened to your music, in high school and so forth. It just occurred to me, crazy thought this afternoon. When you're in a romantic mood, and you're trying to make out, whose records do you put on? I've spent a lot of nice evenings listening to your music, and I just wonder who Frank listens to.
Oh, I play Jerry Fail or some of those.
Not even 10 minutes into the show and its credibility has just vanished. So, what choice do we have but starting from square one?
But it's such a marvelous, wonderful thing, because I don't know that in all the years that we've been friends, and it goes back a long time, I don't know that people have ever had an opportunity to see you in this particular guise. And it's terrific for them. I really think so.
Well, I've never done it. First of all, I haven't had enough time to do a lot of things I wanted to do, if I wanted to do a talk show.
Yeah.
But, and secondly, I would feel stymied on a talk show.
But you've been on a talk show. You've been with Johnny. A cursory Google search shows that you were on his show as early as 1965 when Joey Bishop was a guest host, and you even guest hosted in 1977. Yeah, that's right.
I bring the damn receipts.
Johnny's guest host tonight is Frank Sinatra. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Old Blue Eyes.
Then again, he was the chairman of the board. If he wants to make revisionist history cleverly disguised as having a senior moment, I'm not going to argue at the risk of getting buried underneath the Meadowlands by descendants of his own hired goons.
Hired goons?
This show is all about Jerry Lewis and his ability to command a talk show. One of the major rules of being able to do so is the ability to conduct an interview in a succinct yet probing way. And you don't want to look like you've never done any of that before at the risk of looking unprofessional.
I got to ask you a question because that's my role, okay? Sure. What do you think of today in our business in terms of young singers and young performers?
But you see, and when you and I got into show business, and Charlie at the same time, we could work in clubs in different towns, small clubs, and get some experience. Not some, a lot of experience. And I think that a lot of the kids today are lacking that. And it's a shame that they're lacking it, because there's no way that we can see how far they can go, how much they can grow in what they do.
Yeah.
Because they're gone before we realize what their potential.
I think George Burns said it brighter than I'd ever heard. He said, there's no place...
Why did you ask me the question?
Okay, the one thing I can give this show credit for is that at least it's a talk show where the guests are given time to speak. Not unlike most modern shows where the host feels the need to talk over everybody or, in some cases, force a fake laugh every time that person speaks, Jimmy Fallon.
Nous, les Français, prenons notre comédie très au sérieux. Dans le grand schéma des choses, Jerry Lewis est le meilleur champagne. Tandis que des talents moindres comme Jimmy Fallon seraient comme prendre une gorgée directement de la scène.
Act 2 starts with the showing off of an artifact, an advertisement highlighting Sinatra's first movie. And guess who as one of the undercard performers at the theater that it happened to be playing in?
1944. It was the year that all America was waiting for. It was the year that Frank Sinatra did his first film called Higher and Higher. It was the year that I saw Higher and Higher 67 times. Because I was appearing at the Earl Theater in Washington on the stage with the film Higher and Higher. There's the ad as printed in the Washington Post, 1944. Loosen up so you can see my damn name, Artie, for crying out loud, which is here somewhere.
Which... okay, fine, that's a cute vignette, but as the interview continues, we start to notice what the overall weak point of this show might be. Jerry Lewis may have been one of the great subjects for other hosts to interview, but as an interviewer himself?
Let me ask you about Pavarotti. I know you just did a super performance at Radio City Music Hall with him. Isn't he special?
He's probably one of the greatest vocalists I've ever heard in my life. Not probably, maybe the greatest I've ever heard. And I said to him, I thought to myself, I didn't know that well yet, but I figured I'd take a chance. I said, Maestro, I said, I would like to ask you a question. I said, I'm having a little trouble with closing out the ends of phrases in the sense of a diminuendo. Now, I explained the whole thing to him, and I said, I wondered whether you could help me in teaching me how you just get rid of the note gently. He said, it's easy. You just close up your mouth.
If you come across this show on YouTube, you'll probably notice that I had to cut down Frank's answer for size for that one part. I know I just said it's good for the guests to speak without the host having to talk over them, but at the same time, sometimes the host has to stop the guest where necessary. Whether it's a talk show, game show, news program, or whatever, the primary job of a host is to keep the action moving. I'm sure it's good for some people to be enamored by Frank's story, but we've only got an hour to fill, and YouTube hasn't been invented yet to air extended cuts of interviews. What's more, this was Lewis's question before Frank spoke.
I know you just did a super performance at Radio City Music Hall with him. Isn't he special?
If it were me, I would have rephrased that to something a little less vague, like, I don't know, for instance, I hear you've been working with Pavarotti. What's the most unique thing you saw him do while performing the thing?
Nous sommes conscients des nombreux imitateurs et duplicateurs de la voix et des manières de Jerry Lewis au fil des ans. Bien que l'imitation soit une forme sincère de flatterie, nous voyons la plupart d'entre eux comme rien d'autre qu'une copie éhontée, sans le cœur ni l'âme de l'article authentique. Peut-être que le professeur Frink des Simpsons est l'exception à la règle, mais c'est tout.
Well, all right, just stay calm, Frinky. These babies will be in the stores while he's still grappling with the pickle matrix. Glavin.
Anyway, the conversation continues with the supposedly untold story of what really happened on that fateful night in 1976 when Dean Martin reunited with Jerry for the second time. Yes, the famous reunion after their breakup was actually the second time they got back together. The first was an all-too-brief cameo in 1958 on Eddie Fisher's TV show.
Let me do what I have to do. Will you do me a play? Let me do what I have to do.
Jerry, I would be very...
Just don't sing. Do it.
Sorry for that digression, but once again...
I bring the receipts.
Anyway, back to the subject.
The one thing I remember distinctly catching your eye and thinking to myself, as I was embracing Dean, you were right over his shoulder. I'm thinking to myself, dear God, if Frank doesn't give me something to say, God, give me a line. Something. And we're embracing, and if you remember, when we broke the embrace, I said, you working? It was like a gift from God, because you had to say something under those circumstances.
Well, you must have watched my lips because I was saying that to you.
And again, I'm sure this is all fine and good for certain viewers, but I would have been more interested in what happened after the reunion. Like, did they actually do some catching up when the cameras stopped? Did Dean offer Jerry a peace-offering drink? Inquiring minds want to know is not just a tabloid slogan. Unfortunately, we don't get the answers to that as we say goodbye to Mr. Sinatra, who doesn't sing a thing in this show, by the way, and we move on to the show's midpoint, where, in a slight deviation from talk show norms, the sidekick gets his own stand-up segment. After Jerry reminisces about how he met Charlie Callis, Charlie himself gets to perform for the crowd. And again, I have to give the show a sliver of credit for at least trying to deviate from the default a little, especially on the first episode when we should really be trying to get to know the main host of our show. Then again, Jerry is such a known name by this point in his career that maybe he feels the need to give the spotlight to others.
Now, one fellow for his birthday gets a shotgun. He calls up his friend on the phone. He wants to tell him all about it. This is what went on during and after the phone conversation.
minutes later.
Hello, operator. Hello,
More moments later.
Ralph? Ralph? Hey, Ralph.
2,000 years later.
Guess who this is? Yes, I mean, this is me. This is your friend. Yeah. This is you know what short for this is Sam. Say, listen there, Sam. Today's my
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
And now we know why sidekicks are relegated to the sidekick role on talk shows. Either that or Callis doing that whole bit was meant to be a substitute for a lack of a Sinatra song. Who's to say? At either rate, on to our next guest and one of our returning champions. And for that, flashback with us now to episode 64 and the top 7 bad career moves of TV stars, where our number 3 entry had this to say about her infamous departure from Three's Company and her eventual comeback. And as she continued to say in the TV Academy interview, why not make lemons out of lemonade?
I hear a voice in my head, like a loudspeaker. It says, why are you focused on what you don't have? Why don't you focus on what it is you do have? I sat back and thought, what do I have? Well, I have nothing. What do I have? Visibility. Wow. Everybody in this country knows my name. I have visibility. That's something. Most people will never get that. What can I do with that? And that's when I sent Alan in to Vegas. And went in, and 5 years later, I walked up on a stage along with Frank Sinatra. He was the male entertainer of the year, and I was the female entertainer of the year. So, life, the reinvention began.
So now, Suzanne Summers is our next guest. Newly reinvented, rocking an 80s haircut that would make both Wilson sisters from Heart jealous, wowing audiences in Las Vegas, and giving Jerry probably the horniest moments of his career.
Hi.
You're crazy tonight. I can...
Not me. Mori mi genu mara gene vineni. Mara mi gora mara. You dressed for Good Friday.
Allez, allons, nous sommes tous humains. Et Jerry Lewis a déjà eu sa part de femme principale dans ses films. C'est tout à fait normal pour lui.
Moving right along.
Yeah, but you have something very strange, while unique and interesting. In France, Saint-Tropez, you spend time there?
Oh. You mean the nude people on the beach?
Well, I sure as hell don't want to hear about your skate key.
Do you do that when you're over on the French beaches?
What? Go nude?
Yeah.
I do it here in the studio.
En France, les gens prennent le soleil nu tout le temps. Ce serait probablement plus choquant si vous rencontriez quelqu'un entièrement habillé sur la plage.
As a female, I'm used to seeing topless women because in the Moulin Rouge...
As a female, I don't have to be that. I look at them anyhow. Yeah.
In the Moulin Rouge, there are, 160 of them.
I counted 161.
I know her.
One on the back for dancing, I know.
I guess that one dancer must be from Mars.
Now this is the plan. Get your ass to Mars.
Anyway, before we lose track of just how many multiple entendres there are in this interview, Jerry gets to the big question.
Do you go topless when you go to Saint-Tropez?
I was lying on the beach for 2 weeks, and I wouldn't take my top off. I was pulling and tugging and pulling and tugging, and my husband finally said, you know, you look dumb. He said, everybody here is not without a top. He said, you're the only one. He said, you stand out more than anybody else on the whole beach. He said, why don't you take it off and just relax and join the group? So I did. And within 2 minutes after I was lying there, this guy walks up to me and he says, hey, how's Jack and Janet? That's right, from my show, Three's Company.
Okay, we're all thinking it. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off.
Okay, Chrissy, I'll get in the tub with you, then we can get it on.
Listen to me, I'll show you what to do.
This isn't exactly the first time I've ever done this.
Maybe so, but girls are better at this than boys.
Come on, Chrissy, a little less talk and a little more action, okay?
I don't think it'll reach.
Of course not. You've got to unfold it first.
But Miss Summers didn't just come here to arouse our curiosity. Need I remind you, this is the new Suzanne, star of stage and, well, stage only until She's the Sheriff came along 3 years later. After several more minutes of Jerry's deep probing into the world of nude sunbathers...
Hey, phrasing!
We get to hear her perform one of the many songs that got her an Entertainer of the Year award alongside Old Blue Eyes in the mid-1980s. And if I'm to be honest, this might be this show's saving grace.
Remember, baby, remember you're my baby. When they give you the eye, although I know that you care, won't you write and declare that though?
And I'll be hard-pressed to admit that she does all right here. She is certainly more captivating here than she ever was on Three's Company, and it's good that she was able to move on from all of that. After her performance, one last story about one of her co-stars.
I have a note here. Discuss with Suzanne her relationship with her elephant. Now, I really want to hear that.
Have you ever known an elephant?
Irving the elephant. I knew him very well. No, never.
I ride an elephant twice a night in the show that I do, and this elephant is really wonderful. She's so sweet and so intelligent. But you know, this probably doesn't happen to you anymore, but before you perform, you know how you get butterflies in your stomach, you get excited? And, well, the same thing happened to an elephant. And every night, right as they announce that Tanya the elephant is going out there, and I ride her, she gets all excited, and she does what we would never do. She breaks wind every night. You have not lived even one night.
And as this show draws to a close, something I find myself asking throughout the show is, what exactly is bad about it? And more so, what was bad enough about the show that it didn't wind up surviving after 5 days worth of tests? After all, it's not like Jerry is bad at having a conversation. But the thing is, there's a fine line between a conversation and an interview. One is done in a casual setting, while the other is more probing and or more thought-provoking. This was neither of those things, and I think the show's true intentions, if any, are exposed in Jerry's closing remarks.
I just wish, the best wish I could ever wish you, and that was to have people in show business as your friends. It's a gift, and it's something that doesn't happen to a lot of people. When it happens, and you call upon those friends to assist you in an endeavor like we are attempting here, and they're there for you. The only problem is that you do not have the capacity to expound properly on your gratitude and appreciation. I just wish that for you, because it's a wonderful frustration not to be able to thank people properly, and yet to have them with you when you need them, and to have them make you better by their presence with you. I'm in reference to the lovely people that were here tonight. Frank Sinatra, the lovely Susan Summers. Needless to say, Charlie Callis, he's a national treasure as far as I'm concerned. And as far as an audience is concerned, I hope that you'll come back and we have the pleasure of performing for you again. You've been terrific. Thank you. Good night.
It's hard to pick out the obvious flaws in a show whose run was seemingly intentionally short-lived. It didn't end because the show was bad. It ended because it was only a test run to see if it would become a more permanent program, which it failed to do due to not necessarily low ratings, but also the fact that only 33 TV markets even bothered to air it in the first place. So even if it did have a chance, it was fleeting at best. Nevertheless, if you can't quite pinpoint what the problem with this show truly is, why don't we let the legendary Tom Shales do the heavy lifting for us from beyond the grave? And apologies in advance because these are his words, not mine, as he said in part in his Washington Post review of this show in June of 1984, quote, "Just when you may feel yourself softening towards Jerry Lewis, along comes the Jerry Lewis Show to cure you. It's a real bequest to people who have forgotten why they can't stand Jerry, but it's hardly likely to be just the thing for people who love him. The Lewis Show is getting a tryout this summer as a possible replacement for the eminently replaceable Thick of the Night. Some critics have said Lewis makes Ellen Thicke look good. Nobody is bad enough to do that. It is something to see. Like the truck that turned over recently and spilled 10,000 angry bees onto the highway. Denigrating Lewis for his bad taste is too easy. Besides, there's something vaguely endearing about it. It's the old stupid bad taste as opposed to the new knowing bad taste, and about Lewis's utter obliviousness to whatever has happened in the world since The Nutty Professor came out. That's the original 1960s version. Eddie Murphy would come later. Only a company as perceptively bonkers as Metro Media would dream of showcasing the aging Lewis in the creakiest and leakiest of bare-bones talk show formats. This enterprise gets both the gall and quaintness awards for the year. Lewis obviously feels that his presence alone is such an attraction that very little additional production is necessary, and that he can rely on his years of accumulated shtick rather than exert himself on anything that might pass for new material. The topic of conversation rarely strays from what Martin Mull on Fernwood Tonight used to call facetiously, "this wonderful business of show." Mull's show lampooned, fatally, one might have hoped, the very mentality that Lewis is still extolling to the heavens. There are a number of mildly flabbergasting things about Lewis and his Las Vegas Gothic Anachronist review. One is that it follows The King of Comedy, an underrated Martin Scorsese movie in which Lewis plays Jerry Langford, a parody of precisely the type of bore he appears to be on this talk show. I thought Lewis was acting in that picture, and pretty well. No, says a Hollywood friend, he was just being himself. He doesn't know from parody. Actually, the fictitious Langford show was a classier-looking product than the real Lewis show, another indication of the caliber of thought at Metro Media. The Lewis show plays straight what SCTV's comedy troope's delightfully mean Sammy Maudlin show mercilessly ridiculed.
And Sammy, may I just say, I've never seen a better chemistry than you and Natalie Cole on a talk show in my life, and I think the audience is going to back me up on this. Come on now!
Maudlin, which was inspired by Sammy Davis Jr.'s short-lived talk show, Sammy and Company, satirized the desk and sofa world in which every performer is marvelous and is assumed that the audience sits slack-jawed with envy and admiration. With this Mondo Bizarro throwback, we seem to have come not just full circle, but full circle 3 or 4 times. The Jerry Lewis Show is not a new camp classic, though some viewers may be able to enjoy it that way. The fog of pathos that engulfs the program is a bit too impenetrable to be able to laugh it off as so bad it's good. It's just so bad, it's bad, and sad. It's a really long, creepy wake for an arrogant, self-congratulatory showbiz mindset that the original Saturday Night Live and other shows seem to have killed off. Thus, a viewer of The Jerry Lewis Show may feel somewhat like the heroine of I Walked with a Zombie, except it's I walked with a zombie and he wouldn't shut up. End quote. Tom Shales, wherever you are, thank you for making my job so much easier.
limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, treachery.
First, the basics. This was all a one-week experiment that was meant to springboard into something a little more long-term. Since that long-term never wound up happening, this was essentially a 5-day-long pilot that crashed, and this left Metro Media's plans for syndicating its own original late-night content in limbo. And in the grand tradition of sex sells in practically every walk of life, the segments with Suzanne Summers was enough to turn Professor Julius Kelp into Buddy Love if he wanted to. For the sake of good taste, however, Jerry tried to control the lustful side of comedy. But the program itself pales in comparison to what is probably the series' overall biggest flaw. As we said, Jerry Lewis may have been a great humanitarian and a great talk show guest, and he could certainly play the role of a talk show host in a movie. But those who are expecting him to be more like his character in King of Comedy are going to be in for a disappointment if you come across any of these shows on YouTube, resulting in a very rare case of fraud where the genuine article takes on the role of the pale imitator. Not only that, but you have an unquestionable comic genius doing something that, once in practice, he seems to be a little out of his element to do, especially given the era when it was done. Truth be told, if Lewis did this kind of show after he broke up with Dean Martin, but right before Johnny Carson came along, maybe then he would have had a chance at carving out his own audience, or done so well that Carson wouldn't even be a gleam in any network's eyes. But to try and stake a claim in late-night TV when the competition was already well entrenched in a run as the king of late night could be seen as a folly at best, lamb to the slaughter at worst. Lewis may have been great at many things, but him trying to carve into something that's practically uncarvable may have made him a glutton for punishment. And this experience had to have been enough evidence for Jerry to realize that just because Renaissance men and women are capable of doing most everything, doesn't mean that they should, or to hear his favorite country try to put a positive spin on things.
Ok, donc personne n'est parfait, pas même les génies. C'est la vie.
The 1984 Jerry Lewis talk show earns 4 out of 9 circles of Telehell. One of the great golden rules of show business is that comedy is subjective. What appeals to some people may not always appeal to everybody else. I can't stress enough that I enjoy the work of Jerry Lewis, genuinely. And in spite of some critics, I think what he did with MDA over the decades is more than enough to forgive him for whatever other flaws he may have had that has painted him in a negative light over time. Which, I suppose, is the lesson to learn with all of these vanity projects that have gone awry. Sure, you may have the fame and fortune, but there's only so much you can do with it before you start to get carried away. If you're someone like MC Hammer, you don't have to say yes to every idea that comes your way. If you're Michael Richards, sometimes it's okay to simply sit back and take the victory lap. And if you're Jerry Lewis, you don't have to prove a damn thing anymore because you've already done it all. But if you feel that the ego is bruised just a little bit and you're looking to recover, just remember that the world is a big place, and that maybe you might find that you can be appreciated somewhere else.
Je vous présente Jerry Lewis.
No. It's okay. It's okay. It's me, yes. Here, no, the ring is on the right hand.
Sacré Bill, Jerry Louis, je t'aime. Jerry.
Next time on Telehell, you know what we haven't done in a while? A good old-fashioned list episode. And as long as it's still spring, as of this recording anyway, I'm in the mood for love. Terrible, contrived, and ill-conceived love.
Kids, I'm gonna tell you an incredible story. The story of how I met your mother.
Until then...
Si ce n'est pas dans Telehell, ça ne vaut rien.
The voice of our French disclaimer lady comes to us courtesy of 11 Labs. And if you want to know what exactly it is that she's saying, well, we live in the 21st century, there's plenty of translation programs out there. And now here are the rest of the credits.
Telehell was written, produced, edited, and narrated by me, Justin Hart. All clips used in this program are protected under the Fair Use Doctrine of the U.S. Copyright Act of 1976, and all clips used come courtesy of their respective companies and owners. Some of the music used in this program comes courtesy of YouTube and their audio library service. Telehell is a production of Horton Road and is distributed by Libsyn.
We have reason to believe that the world may soon become an actual living hell in the next few months, if not few years from now. Fortunately, our social media feeds are as close as we're going to get to having heaven on earth. So please, if you have Facebook, Blue Sky, or yes, even X, follow us at Telehell Podcast. Feel free to chip in to future episodes by giving us a couple coins at our Patreon, also at Telehell Podcast. Like, comment, rate, subscribe wherever you hear this show, particularly Apple, Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and even our YouTube page, all of which will be either at Telehell Podcast or at Telehell. One way or another, you'll get there. And of course, if you heard something that you didn't quite agree with us on, you're more than welcome to lay it into us at our complaint line, telehellpodcast@gmail.com.
Never walk alone. You'll never walk alone.
Good night, everybody, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. You're wonderful. Good night. God bless you.
Another great show from Horton Road.